Summer 1457. An Ottoman army, 80,000 soldiers strong, crossed into Albania with absolute certainty. They had siege towers, war elephants, cannons that had shattered the walls of Constantinople itself. And for 3 months, they found nothing. No fortresses under siege, no armies forming battle lines, no resistance they could see. Just abandoned villages, scorched fields, and silence so complete it felt deliberate. The Ottomans were hunting an enemy that refused to exist. Supplies dwindled. Disease spread through the camps. Soldiers began deserting in the night. What started as a conquest became something else, a slow unraveling in a land that seemed to swallow armies whole. And then, on September 2nd, when the Ottoman commanders finally believed the threat had dissolved, the mountains came alive. What happened next wasn't just a defeat. It was the kind of humiliation empires spend centuries trying to forget. This is the story of how one man, armed with nothing but patience and intimate knowledge of his enemy's pride, turned the most powerful military force on earth into a case study in strategic frustration. And it starts with a boy who was supposed to become the empire's perfect weapon. If you've ever wondered why certain histories disappear while others dominate, you're in the right place. Crimson historians excavate what the world buried. Missionary letters, Ottoman archives, forgotten testimonies. Every like, every subscription exposes another humiliation empires tried to erase. 1443. 20 years before the trap closed, a child, maybe 8 years old, walks through the gates of the Ottoman imperial court in Edirne. His name is Gjergj Kastrioti, son of an Albanian lord, and he's been taken, not kidnapped, traded. This was the devshirme system, a policy so methodical it barely qualified as cruelty. The Ottomans would identify the sons of conquered nobility, offer their fathers a choice that wasn't really a choice, and absorb the children into the empire's military machinery. The logic was elegant. Turn your enemy's heirs into your most loyal generals. For 2 decades, it worked flawlessly with Gjergj. He was placed in the palace schools, where the empire trained its future commanders. He studied military engineering, cavalry tactics, logistics, siege warfare. He learned Ottoman Turkish, Persian, Arabic. He converted to Islam and took a new name. But more importantly, he learned how the empire thought. He learned that Ottoman strategy relied on a single, overwhelming principle: shock and mass. Assemble a force so large that resistance feels irrational. Move so fast that enemies panic before they can organize. Create the impression that opposition is futile, and then watch most conflicts resolve themselves before a single arrow is fired. The system worked because most enemies believed in it. By his mid-20s, Gjergj, now called Skanderbeg, Lord Alexander, was commanding Ottoman armies. He led successful campaigns in Anatolia, in the Balkans. His reputation reached the Sultan's inner circle. His commanders praised his discipline, his tactical precision, his loyalty. And then in November 1443, during a messy skirmish against Hungarian forces near Niš, Skanderbeg and 300 Albanian cavalry under his command simply left. No announcement, no dramatic speech. One moment they were part of the Ottoman line, the next they were gone. The empire had spent 20 years sharpening a weapon, teaching it every vulnerability in their system, every pattern in their thinking, every assumption they made about loyalty and control. And now that weapon was walking away, carrying 2 decades of their secrets with him. What Skanderbeg understood, what the Ottomans would take years to realize, was that the devshirme system had a fatal flaw. It assumed that loyalty could be manufactured through education and opportunity. It assumed that a boy taken from his family would forget where he came from. But Skanderbeg never forgot. He just learned to hide that memory behind perfect obedience until the moment obedience was no longer useful. The Ottomans had created their own enemy. They had given him access to their war rooms, their strategy sessions, their internal debates about where the empire was strong and where it was brittle. They had shown him how decisions moved through the command structure, how supplies were allocated, how intelligence was gathered and analysed. And most critically, they had taught him to think like an Ottoman general, which meant he knew exactly how an Ottoman general would respond to any given situation. This wasn't just defection. This was the exploitation of a systemic vulnerability the empire didn't know it had. The Ottomans had built a machine for turning conquered children into loyal commanders. But they had never considered what would happen if one of those commanders decided the machine itself was the enemy. Skanderbeg didn't just reject the empire, he understood it so completely that rejection became a form of weaponized knowledge. What happened next reveals something essential about how Skanderbeg operated. He didn't attack the Ottoman fortress at Kruja, he walked through the front gate. Skanderbeg had spent years inside Ottoman administrative systems. He knew how orders moved, how documents were sealed, how governors verified commands, so he forged a letter. The document claimed to be from Sultan Mehmed II himself, ordering the governor of Kruja to surrender the fortress to Skanderbeg immediately. The forgery was so precise, right ink, correct phrasing, authentic seal, that the governor never questioned it. He simply obeyed, without siege engines, without casualties. Without even raising suspicion until it was too late, Skanderbeg took control of Albania's most strategically important fortress. The Ottomans lost the position not because their defences failed, they lost it because someone understood their bureaucracy better than they did. This wasn't just deception. This was institutional knowledge turned against the institution. Skanderbeg knew that the Ottoman Empire, for all its military power, ran on paperwork, on chains of command, on the assumption that certain documents carried unquestionable authority. He knew that a governor stationed in a remote fortress wouldn't have regular contact with the Sultan's court. That verification would take weeks. That by the time anyone realized the order was fake, it would be too late to matter. He knew all of this because he had been part of the system that created these vulnerabilities. The empire's size, which was supposed to be its strength, required layers of bureaucratic trust, and trust, Skanderbeg understood, could be manufactured. When Sultan Mehmed II learned what happened, the response was immediate. An army was dispatched. Not for negotiation, for erasure. The Battle of Torviol, June 1444. Ottoman forces, estimated between 25,000 and 40,000 soldiers, marched toward Kruja, expecting to crush a minor rebellion in a matter of days. Skanderbeg had maybe 8,000 fighters, mostly light infantry, no siege equipment, no cavalry reserves. Standard military doctrine said this was suicide. Skanderbeg did something the Ottomans never anticipated. He used their own tactics against them. He positioned his smaller force in terrain the Ottoman cavalry couldn't easily maneuver through. Then he staged a false retreat, a classic Ottoman maneuver, drawing the heavy cavalry into overextension. When the Ottoman horsemen charged forward, assuming the Albanians were breaking, they found themselves isolated from their own infantry. Skanderbeg's forces counterattacked from concealed positions in the hills. The result was a slaughter. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers were killed. The rest retreated in disarray. It was a victory, but the real damage wasn't on the battlefield. The real damage was psychological. An Ottoman-trained general had just demonstrated that the empire's tactics were predictable, that their reliance on overwhelming force created exploitable blind spots, that the empire's strength was also a pattern, and patterns could be broken. The Ottomans had developed their military doctrine over decades of conquest. It worked against fragmented European kingdoms, against disorganized tribal confederations, against enemies who fought the way the Ottomans expected them to fight. But Skanderbeg wasn't fighting the way they expected. He was fighting the way they had taught him to fight, and then adding layers they had never considered. The false retreat wasn't just a tactic, it was a mirror. The Ottomans used feigned retreats constantly to draw enemies into vulnerable positions. It was so common in their playbook that opposing armies had learned to recognize it. But when Skanderbeg used the same tactic against Ottoman forces, it created a psychological trap. The Ottoman commanders knew about feigned retreats. They knew they should be cautious. But they also knew that recognizing and exploiting an enemy's broken morale was how battles were won. So they charged anyway, caught between their training and their suspicion, and that hesitation, that split second of uncertainty, was all Skanderbeg needed. He wasn't just defeating an army, he was defeating a doctrine. And that's what made Torviol so devastating. It wasn't about the casualties, it was about what those casualties represented. The Ottoman military system had been revealed as something that could be studied, understood, and systematically exploited by someone who knew it well enough. For the next 13 years, the Ottomans and Skanderbeg fought a war that barely resembled war. There were no grand battles, no sieges that lasted months, no dramatic field engagements where fate was decided in a single afternoon. Instead, there was erosion. Ottoman armies would enter Albania with 30,000, 50,000, sometimes 70,000 soldiers. They would march toward key positions, set up camps, prepare for confrontation, and Skanderbeg would dissolve. His forces would fragment into small mobile units that struck supply lines, ambushed patrols, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. The Ottomans would control territory during the day and lose control of it at night. There was no front line,